The crack of the cop's hand against the old man's face was so loud it silenced the farmer's market. Families froze mid-conversation. Children dropped their ice cream cones, and even the barking dogs tethered to poles went still. It wasn't a scuffle between drunks or a fight between teenagers. It was a uniformed police officer striking a gray-haired produce vendor in broad daylight. The man who fell back against his stall wasn't some criminal or threat. He was just Frankie, the guy everyone in town knew. The one who showed up at dawn every Saturday with boxes of tomatoes, sweet corn, and cucumbers he'd grown himself. He was the kind of man who remembered your kid's name, slipped an extra apple into your bag, and waved at passing cars with the kind of warmth that made people believe small-town America still existed. And now he was standing in the dirt, one hand on his swelling cheek, while his carefully stacked produce rolled across the gravel. A bunch of grapes split under someone's boot, juice staining the ground like blood. Mothers clutched their children tighter. An old veteran who bought Frankie's carrots every week clenched his fists but didn't move. Everyone felt the injustice, but the badge staring them down kept their mouths shut. Next time you block the sidewalk, old man, it won't just be a slap, Officer Daniels barked, his mirrored sunglasses flashing under the noon sun. His voice carried that smug confidence of someone who thought he was untouchable, someone who believed his uniform gave him the right to humiliate whoever he wanted. But this time, the marketplace wasn't silent out of fear. This time, the silence was recording. Phones shot up instantly, dozens of them, angled from every direction. Shoppers who'd come for fresh strawberries and homemade jam now had their cameras locked on a scene they couldn't believe was happening in their own neighborhood. Some whispered nervously, "Keep filming? Don't stop." Others just held their breath, praying the officer wouldn't lash out again. Frankie bent down, hands trembling, and started gathering his spilled tomatoes. Each one he picked up felt heavier than the last, not because of its weight, but because of what had been stripped from him in front of his community, his dignity. His lip was bleeding, his pride shattered, but there was something in the way he lifted those tomatoes, one by one, and placed them gently back on the table. It was as if he was silently saying, "You can hit me, but you won't erase me." The officer sneered, his hand twitching like he might strike again. For a second, everyone tensed. A mother shielded her son's face. A teenager whispered, "He's really gonna do it again." But then Daniel smirked and spat on the ground, turning his back on Frankie as if he was trash unworthy of his attention. That was his mistake, because the moment his back turned, a wave of whispers spread like wildfire. "I got it on video. Post it. Don't let this go." Within minutes, clips were already being uploaded to Facebook, TikTok, and Twitter/X. Hashtags were forming in real time. The world outside the sleepy town was about to see what had happened in the dirt parking lot of a farmer's market. Frankie straightened slowly, his chest heaving, his cheek throbbing. He didn't shout. He didn't curse. He just looked around at the crowd with wet eyes that burned with both humiliation and something else. Something deeper. Resolve. And for the first time, the people looking back at him weren't just customers. They were witnesses. What Officer Daniels thought was a display of dominance had actually been the start of his unraveling. Because what happened at the farmer's market that day wasn't just a slap. It was the spark of a storm that would soon be bigger than he could imagine. By the time Officer Daniels sat down for lunch that afternoon, the video had already hit 10,000 views. By the time he finished his sandwich, it was 100,000. By dinner, it was everywhere. The clip was short, brutal, and impossible to misinterpret. A police officer in full uniform slapping a 62-year-old farmer's market vendor so hard his stall collapsed. The vendor's cheek swelling. The crowd gasping. The officer sneering as if nothing mattered. The entire thing captured in high definition by half a dozen angles and stitched together by strangers who didn't even know each other, but who knew injustice when they saw it. On Facebook, the video was shared with captions like, "This is my town. This is the man who sells my family vegetables every Saturday. Look at how he's treated." On TikTok, the soundtrack was slowed down for maximum impact. The slap replayed in a loop under the text, "Protect and serve?" or "Slap and humiliate." On Twitter/X, hashtags exploded. Hashtag justice for Frankie. Hashtag ban Daniels. #FarmerNotCriminal. By nightfall, news anchors were playing the clip on repeat, their voices heavy with outrage. Tonight, a video out of Brookfield County is sparking nationwide conversation about police accountability. The same officer who thought the marketplace was his stage of dominance now found himself the villain in a viral story that crossed state lines. And then came the part Daniels never saw coming, his past. Old complaints surfaced. People who had once whispered about his abuse of power now had proof that they weren't alone. A mother came forward about how he harassed her teenage son during a traffic stop. A veteran recalled being shoved against his car for talking back. Each story was shared under the same hashtags, turning one slap into a pattern, one video into a movement. Meanwhile, Frankie, the man who'd spent his life quietly stacking produce crates, sat in his modest kitchen, staring at the screen in disbelief. His daughter showed him the comments pouring in from strangers across the country. "You're a good man, Frankie. We're with you. Stay strong. You didn't deserve this. That officer needs to be fired." For the first time, Frankie wasn't invisible. He wasn't just the guy at the stall. He was the face of something larger. Every working-class American who had ever been stepped on, dismissed, or humiliated by someone abusing authority. And the people weren't just watching. They were demanding change. The mayor's office phones rang off the hook. The police chief's inbox flooded. Protest flyers appeared overnight. Rally at City Hall. Justice for Frankie. By sunrise, a crowd had gathered outside with signs. End police abuse. Farmers feed us, not criminals. Accountability now. Inside the department, Daniels paced like a caged animal. He called it exaggeration, fake news, taken out of context. But none of it mattered. The video didn't lie, and every denial only fueled the fire. The internet doesn't forget, and it doesn't forgive. Frankie, on the other hand, didn't ask for any of it. He didn't want to be a symbol. He wanted his cart, his customers, his quiet Saturdays. But as cameras swarmed his front yard, as reporters stuck microphones in his face, he realized something painful and true. Sometimes you don't choose the fight. Sometimes the fight chooses you. And this fight was far from over. Because if the slap was the spark, the storm was now fully awake. And the next strike would not fall on Frankie. It would fall on the man who thought a badge made him untouchable. By Monday morning, the Brookfield Police Department was barricaded behind protest lines. The video hadn't just gone viral, it had ignited a movement. College students marched with hand-painted signs. Farmers from surrounding counties drove in with tractors, honking in solidarity. Retired veterans showed up wearing their medals, declaring they knew a bully when they saw one. The chant outside City Hall thundered through the streets. Justice for Frankie! Justice for Frankie! Inside the department, Officer Daniels sat stone-faced across from the chief. His badge lay on the table between them, stripped from his chest. "You put us in an impossible position," the chief growled, his voice low and hard. "Do you have any idea the damage you've caused this department?" Daniels opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in his career, his arrogance had no ground to stand on. The slap that once made him feel powerful now played on loop on every news station in the country. He wasn't feared anymore, he was despised. By noon, the announcement came. Officer Daniels has been placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation. The words scrolled across the bottom of TV screens nationwide. Reporters repeated them with grim satisfaction. Protesters erupted into cheers, but they weren't done. They didn't want suspension, they wanted accountability. Meanwhile, Frankie stood at the edge of the crowd, overwhelmed. He wasn't used to cameras, to microphones, to strangers calling him a hero. He'd always been just a man with a produce stand, trying to feed his family. But when a reporter asked him how it felt to see thousands rally in his name, his answer was simple, steady, and unforgettable. "I didn't ask for this," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "But if my pain can stop one more officer from thinking he can treat people like trash, then it was worth it." The crowd erupted in applause. For once, Frankie wasn't invisible. His swollen cheek was a badge of honor now, not of weakness but of survival. And Daniels? The internet didn't let go. More complaints surfaced. The state attorney's office launched a civil rights investigation. Politicians weighed in. His face became a meme, his name a curse. The career he thought was untouchable crumbled in weeks. But the greatest consequence wasn't legal, it was moral. Daniels couldn't walk into a grocery store without glares, couldn't pump gas without whispers. The power he had abused for years was gone. He was no longer the man in uniform who commanded fear. He was just another man who crossed a line and paid the price. Frankie's stall returned the next Saturday. His tomatoes were stacked higher than ever, his apples polished, his corn fresh. But something was different. Customers lined up not just to buy produce but to shake his hand, to thank him, to remind him he wasn't alone. Children who once shyly tugged at their mother's skirts now ran up to hug him. He smiled through tears he didn't try to hide. The slap that was meant to crush him had instead lifted him up. And as the sun dipped low behind the red barns and food trucks of the farmer's market, Frankie wiped his hands on his apron and looked out at the community gathered around his stall. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Justice hadn't erased the scar on his cheek, but it had given him something more powerful. The proof that even the smallest voice, the quietest man, could bring down the loudest bully if the world was watching.